bring in Matthew, our friend from Ohio. How are you today?
Hey, Josie. Hey, Luxander. How are you guys?
Excellent.
Doing well.
Fantastic. So I called, we've been having conversations for about a couple of weeks now, and I would like to hope that they're going somewhere, but I feel like there is not this kind of conversation that's productive. I think we're getting, like, when I first called in with Dr. Ben Luxander, we talked about the difference between gender and sex, and I came in knowing that there's a difference between gender and sex. And we kind of came to a conclusion that I felt like was really good, that can kind of move us forward in conversation. And I think, Josie, you were making it seem like that was like a big conversation between you and I had to like twist my arm to say there's a difference. But no, I've always known there was a difference. Even we have boys and girls, which are male and female, but they don't have gender. Their gender is not man or woman. So anywho, the point is, I think I want us to, if we can, foster a better conversation, because even when the last talk with Dr. Ben, I was having this conversation, and I came in kind of just emptying my mind, and you asked me, Josie, about the woman thing, about the Merriam-Webster, and I look at the Merriam-Webster, and it says an adult female person, and I'm like, I tried to took your word for it that it wasn't that, I thought it was something else.
Well, there's a second definition to it. What dictionary are you looking at? You said they've gone online, and in the second definition, it talks about gender, right?
It just says a woman belonging to a particular category at birth.
Let me. I'm gonna pull it up right now.
Real quick.
Hold on.
Too, I did some research on sex, and how. And I had this conversation with Luxander, and it seemed like Luxander was saying, like, yeah, sex is from the brain, and we were agreeing at first. I thought, I don't know how that kind of came about, and because I think even one conversation, Luxander was like, "Oh, conversation blew up," and I was like, "No, we're doing really good." And so I don't know how.
So Matthew, hold on. Yeah, I want that too. But I'm looking at Merriam-Webster dictionary right now, and the first definition is an adult female person, and the second is a woman belonging to a particular category, as in birth, residence, membership, or occupation, usually used in combination of councilwoman. And then you also have womankind, distinctive feminine nature. So how does that contradict with what I was saying, especially when I was talking about the categories, such as a trans woman, a cis woman?
I disagree with it. I disagree with Merriam-Webster, and I didn't see it, so I was like, maybe they changed it. I know they're probably trying to do that or something, so I was like, okay, sure. My point is just
okay, but I don't want to have the argument.
Yeah.
So I hear you're having good faith, and Luxander, apologize.
You can call me Lux. It's fine.
I know. Sometimes I just like get my tongue twisted. So Lux, for context, I was actually on the hang up with Matt last night, and Matthew called in. We talked about logic, and Matthew, the one thing that I think stopped the conversation last time that we had the conversation is you said in this call that there is a difference between gender and sex, right? You said you agree with that.
Yes, that was from the beginning. Okay. That's what my mindset was.
Okay, cool. So the statement that some women have penises and some women don't is a true statement, right? Because there's a difference between gender and sex. Right.
So let's put it this way, right? Let's say, not because, remember I said boy and girl too, those are also genders, right? And so that's the difference between sex and gender. So my thing, right, if it said an adult female person can have a penis, I would say no. I would say that.
Okay, hold on. I really, this is the problem that we've been having for weeks, Matthew. I'm sorry, I'm being silly. So honey, a male is a sex and a man is a gender. And that's the problem that you keep stumbling on. We are trying to, you agree that, no. You agree that sex and gender are different, right? So the problem is that you are defining the gender of woman by the sex of female. and you are contradicting yourself, because you are, on the one hand, stating that you believe that there's a difference between sex and gender, but then the immediate next statement that you make is that you define woman, the gender, by the sex female. Can you understand why that's frustrating?
So listen, so with this is like a girl, right? A girl is a female, but a girl is not a woman.
No, a girl is a gender of a child that has not yet grown into a woman. Like it's we put that on a child. We have a female child who grows up like, you know, this child like is 5 years old, and we impose girlness on her. Like a child, like you are personally of the opinion that a child cannot understand gender. So you should also agree that when you impose she, her pronouns on a child who's 5 years old, you are imposing a gender on them based on their sex. But you understand that gender is separate from sex. So you're contradicting yourself. And that's why this has been a very difficult, frustrating, ongoing conversation for like more than a month.
Yes. Thank you, Lux. That's right.
Yeah. So maybe help me understand the contradiction with a woman having a penis.
Right. Because a woman can be male. Because a woman is a gender. That's a societal construct around, you know, how you look and dress and how people talk to you. Whereas sex is like what your doctor knows about your genitals and your chromosomes, maybe. I've never had my chromosomes tested. I don't know. I could be like XXXY or some shit like that. I don't know. Most people don't know, as a matter of fact. I can assume that I produce certain gametes, but I've never had that tested either. So yeah, a male can be a woman. Where are we getting this idea of woman from? Was that the question?
Yeah. When we say women, what are we talking about?
Yeah, we're talking about like a social group of people who have a collection of traits together and like who occupy like a social status. Like, you know, Josie went into like a lot of detail with you on a previous call about like, you know, not fitting in with boys and not feeling comfortable growing up and being like, I'm being treated like a man and I have to perform this male role, like going into the military and doing all this hardcore masculine stuff, you know, like those things exist because society props them up. Like money exists because society props it up. Like money is a social construct, but it controls our lives. Gender is a social construct, but it controls our lives.
So what are the traits of when you say like the traits of a woman? What do you mean by sharing certain traits of women? What do you mean by that when you say that?
So it again, it's like you know how when you look at like in society, like there's categories, right? Even in the dictionary here, it's about particular categories of things, right? And so like, you know, in society, and I'm saying society, not the individual, in society, people think long hair, feminine, like makeups, dresses, like soft skin, like all these like things are all like, oh yeah, that's womanness or woman, like womanliness or womankind. Those type of things, like, you know, that's kind of like the category, but those are all part of like the bimodal understanding of the gender of woman. But this is the deal, right? You don't have to have all those things to be a woman, right? There are women with short hair. There are women that like sports and like rough and tumble. They like, there's all these different things. So that's why it's easier to just ask the person, hey, are you a woman? Right. And then that's how you're able to do it. Right. And that's how we're able to understand like what a woman is when you say, hey, are you a woman? Yeah, you got to ask them.
You mean like a trans person, or just any person you ask if they're a woman?
Any person you can ask if they're a woman or not. Like, you know, you can just say, you know, it's like, hey, what is your gender identity? And they'll tell you. Right. And their gender identity is going to.
About in this society where we acknowledge trans and all this stuff, you would ask that. You're not talking about in traditional society. You mean like kind of introducing that kind of thing.
Anybody can run into this problem. I don't know if, Matthew, you're like familiar with the experience of like, it's very common for women, cisgender women, who are in strong leadership roles or who work on cars or who play sports, there are people who will call them men, whether they are joking or not, because society as a whole kind of has this concept of manhood and womanhood. And if you deviate from those, there are people who will attempt to basically strip you of that identity. Like, how many times have you heard people saying that Hillary Clinton is a lesbian or that Hillary Clinton is a man?
I know those jokes.
Yeah. So, you know, any
go
person,
to a working woman and be like, "Are you a woman?"
Right. Yeah. So most of the time we use a collection of passive communication things to indicate to other people what social category we belong to, which is why you might have like a trans woman who just came out as trans, and, you know, maybe she hasn't started hormones or transition yet. So maybe she still, like, in her face looks what we would describe as like mannish or manly. And then she's growing out her hair and she's wearing a padded bra and she's wearing a skirt or a dress. Like, we use like gender expression to communicate what group we belong to. And like, not everybody fits in that perfectly, because there are butch women and there are butch trans women as well, who are like gender nonconforming.
I mean, I would say I'm pretty a strong man, but I would not go into a butch woman and say, "Hey, are you a woman?" I wouldn't ask that. I'm like,
right. You wouldn't do that, but you would say, "Hey, what's your pronouns?" Right? You can start there. That's completely acceptable, right? If you're not sure, if you saw Lux, you could be like, "Hey, what's your name and what are your pronouns?"
You're talking about in this society now as we kind of are shifting, right? You're not talking about back then.
There are gender
ask pronouns.
There are.
Where maybe I'm still in the past, because like right now I wouldn't do that. I don't feel comfortable doing that. But you're saying now it's okay to be comfortable doing that.
No. So to be clear, most of the time this is not a relevant question. Like, most of the time, most people look pretty stereotypically male or female, right? There might be a situation where you meet someone who is very androgynous in their gender presentation. Like, maybe they have really short hair and they're wearing bright colored nail polish. And maybe you're like, I'm not sure what those signals are. It might be appropriate in that situation to ask what their pronouns are. Or what I always recommend is, if you're wanting to ask someone's pronouns, I actually recommend that you introduce yourself with your pronouns, which gives the other person an opportunity to tell you what theirs are. It definitely puts this person on the spot a lot less. Basically, like, your question is asking, like, what does womanhood mean? And the answer is that it depends on the society that you live in. Like, in a Muslim society, a woman is a person who covers her hair, right? But like in the West, in America, a woman is a person who has long hair, and that like can be flexible. Like, it's not like we tell people you're not a woman anymore if you cut your hair. I mean, sometimes people are rude and will say things like that. Womanhood.
If a Muslim man saw my wife, he'd probably think she was disrespectful, but he wouldn't say she's not a woman because she's not covering her hair.
Well, but it depends on what society you live in.
Yeah, if you were in a Muslim country, right? Like, the fact of the matter is, like, it's pretty easy in society that you live in. If you look around, you see most of the women covering their hair because that's what they do. Traditionally, that's a marker. That's like a marker in society that says, oh, this person is probably a woman, right? As a gender category, not as a sex, just as a gender category, right? And that's what we're trying to say. And that's why, Matthew, I've said in the beginning a couple of times on this call about the idea of a blonde-headed woman, a black woman, a cis woman, and a trans woman are all types of women, because the woman in that, and according to the dictionary too, the woman is the category of the gender that they are, just like a councilwoman is a woman, right? Because she's identifying as a councilwoman, right? So like, the idea is the gender is the woman, and that's why when I say, when you say sex and gender are different, and that's why the sentence that I said, some women have penises and some women don't is a logical statement because woman is gender and penis is sex.
So
because they're different.
And just for the sake of what I might be the topic that I'm talking about here, someone like me, maybe knuckle dragging traditionalist Christian, you're not going to convince somebody. And I'm not saying you're wrong or right. I'm saying you're not going to convince them with type of language.
Matthew, I have to stop for you a second, right? Because we're talking about logic, right? We're talking about logic, and we've had this conversation many times about logic, right? If you fundamentally believe that there is a difference between sex and gender, the sentence that I am saying, some women have penises and some don't, is a logical statement. Is that not correct?
And I'm just playing the proverbial coyote and biting my leg off and then saying, let's just say I'm illogical, right? Knuckle dragging, traditional.
But then it becomes fallacious, right? Everything outside of that premise that we talk about is no longer.
I would like to keep this contained because Matthew, we've been talking to you about your beliefs, and I want because it feels like a shifting of the goalpost. Like it feels like we're just about to agree with each other, but then you're deflecting to some hypothetical like person who's not present in this conversation, right? Like, let's keep it contained because you describe yourself as traditional, and you describe
it's like
your beliefs.
And I'm not going to argue that whether I do or don't. So
is the statement correct then? Is the statement that I'm saying some women is the statement that I am saying some women have penises and some women don't? Is that a logical, consistent argument or logical sentence that is correct if you believe sex and gender are different? Because that's where the hang up is. So not to you, but you do agree that the sentence is logical and you're wrong. So you're just saying you're wrong.
Okay. Right. Let's just say that I'm illogical, right? And I think kind of what Luxander is saying too is like
I want to have a conversation with you, the person, right now. Don't go, oh, let's say I'm whatever. Like, I'm trying to have a conversation with you right now. Hold on, Matthew. I really need to clarify this with you. You have an internally inconsistent view. You had a conversation with Josie about logic last night. You have an internally inconsistent view that you need to confront and that we are trying to get you to confront. If you believe that sex and gender are different, then you must believe that some trans women can have penises or that some women can have penises. Like you're literally flip-flopping from one sentence to the next, unless you're just claiming that you don't care about logic, in which case, we don't really have a conversation. No, stick with the example that we're giving you.
Yeah, Matthew, this is a skeptic channel, right? The line is about logic and reason and reality of how we speak. And that is very important to the truth of what we're trying to go to. Because if we can't fundamentally believe the logical truths of around the world around us, how can we continue to have a conversation when the foundational beliefs of what we're talking about are not accounted for? Right? How can we have a conversation about playing basketball if we don't agree that gravity exists? Right? you can't do it, right? It's like, no, gravity isn't here, so now we're going to talk about basketball. No, we have to figure out why you don't believe gravity exists. That's where we are in this conversation.
So this is where my hang up is then. So I'll ask this question. This is where on the Ask the Trans show. My question here is, why is that if gender, let's say for example, gender is not connected to sex in the way of, genitalia, why is it that when somebody feels that they are female, when they feel that they're a woman, they want to have female body parts?
Because of gender dysphoria, which is an internal mental state.
Which we've discussed in the previous show. And this is why, Matthew, this statement is so important, because if we started at this point, then we could have went to that question in a very logical way, right? Because at the end of the day, for you to ask that question in good faith, you have to agree with the logical statement that some women have penises and some don't. And if you agree with that statement and say, yes, that's logically consistent, then we can add the other layer of, if that's the case, then why do some trans women have bottom surgery, right? Which is a completely different question that is based on the foundation of the logical understanding that some women can have penises and some don't, right? Because gender dysphoria is a completely different conversation about the medical understanding of how we view our bodies outside of the truth, the fundamental truth that all trans women agree and trans people agree to, is that some women have penises and some don't. Does that make sense?
Plenty of trans people don't want surgery, like, to be clear. Like, please, plenty of trans people are not interested in having surgery. Like, we all agree that a trans woman can have a penis, and then, like, that's the gender conversation. But then the gender dysphoria thing is that, yes, to some people, they don't feel whole as a woman because there is a societal expectation, or maybe it's just an internal, like, we talked about the brain body map distinction already, that, like, yes, some people have, like, this feeling like they should have certain genitals, right? And that is that's a separate thing, because there are plenty of trans people who don't want surgery or who don't want hormones. So we, you know, like, that's two different conversations, and I'm happy to have that. But, like, we are fundamentally stuck on this whole, like, you seem to not actually, you seem to state that you believe a difference in sex and gender, but then in practice, you don't believe that there's a difference.
So here's the thing, and this is where maybe we can find some common ground here. So when you say some women can have penises and some don't, I say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I find it logically inconsistent when every time, for me, and you're telling me that this is not all the case, the majority of the time I would say that when somebody is wanting to transition, they also want to transition physically as well, meaning they want to have female body parts when they identify as a woman.
It's it's easier to socially integrate if you have the expected physiology.
And Matthew, and it's not logically. I'm not saying I don't accept that
idea. Okay, hold on. Let's say I'm not saying I do or I don't accept that idea, but do you see how there can be in someone's mind saying, okay, I hear what you're saying about some women can have penises, but that seems logically inconsistent when this happens, right? And then you can. I think
you only know, like, 4 trans people. I think the problem is that you only know, like, 4 trans people. You know one trans person who's had bottom surgery. You know one trans person who wants bottom surgery. You know another trans person who doesn't want bottom surgery. I don't actually know if you've spoken directly to Arden or not, so I can't include her in this. But, like, so you know a grand total of 3 trans people who all have, like, who are all in slightly different places on their personal, like, I want surgery or not. The overwhelming majority of trans people do not get bottom surgery. Like, that's the overwhelming majority.
I hear what you're saying, but do you understand how I would see that as logically inconsistent?
Matthew,
if a tiny minority want surgery, like, the tiny minority who want surgery invalidate the entire premise that sex and gender are distinct. That's not what I'm saying. I'm asking you the question.
This is the problem. Answer Lux's question, because like this is why this logical inconsistency ruins everything, right? Because if you can just say the logical statement that sex and gender is different, so therefore a woman can have a penis and some women don't. Some women have penises, some women don't. That is the logical statement that follows after you identify that there's a difference between sex and gender. If you can agree with that point, it doesn't matter what a trans woman does with their body. They're still women.
Well, I can't agree with it when I find logical inconsistencies. And if you
that's not a logical inconsistency. Those are two different things. Those are two different things. You see, Matthew, you're conflating two different things because of your logical inconsistency. Because it doesn't matter what a trans person does with their body.
There are cisgender people who seek these procedures. Like, I know cisgender women who get a mastectomy. They get their tits completely cut off, which we understand to be, like, a gender affirming surgery for men. But, like, there are cis people who also are interested in these procedures. So like that is, if that doesn't show that gender is distinct from sex, then I don't know what does. Because if you can be cisgender and be like, yeah, I would like to get surgery that changes my body in a way that is typically gendered, but it's like I'm changing my sex features, you know, like some trans people wanting to change their bodies does not invalidate the logic of the premise that sex and gender are different. Like Josie was saying, like if we understand that sex and gender are different, then it literally doesn't matter what anybody does with their body, because that is not a statement about their gender.
Right.
Okay. But just because something or things are different doesn't mean everything else can fall in the category that it's different. So, for example, if I said
what
trunks are pardon?
So I don't understand.
It's just
that
was
statement.
word salad, and it made no fucking sense. That's why we're confused.
Yeah. Sorry, let me explain. Yeah, let me explain. So let's say I say trunks are different from noses, right? So elephants have trunks, and certain animals have noses. And you say, well, trunks are different from noses. You say, yeah, trunks are different from noses. So then you say, then does that mean cat has trunks? And it's like, no.
So
that doesn't.
Wait, you see, this is why you need to
you're
take
doing a
logic
completely different thing here.
Yeah, it's like saying some trees have coconuts, so trees that have coconuts are only trees with coconuts can have coconuts. I mean, sorry, only trees can have coconuts, right? But the reality is, the true statement is, some trees have coconuts, but having coconuts doesn't have to make you a tree, right? So some
or it doesn't
trees have
solely
coconuts.
Define a tree.
Right. So some trees have coconuts and some trees don't, but that still makes them trees. So there you go. There is a equivalent logical statement to some women have penises and some don't. Some trees have coconuts and some trees don't. It's the same logical consistency across the board. Does that make sense?
No, well, the coconut thing makes sense, but I think when it refers to women,
now apply the coconut. So instead of tree, use the word woman, and instead of coconut, use the word penis, and then repeat that sentence, and that is what logical consistency means.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and like I said, this is where I mean by fostering better conversation, right? Because it could just be, we had this conversation before, that I just have some cognitive dissonance or whatever it is, right?
Matthew, no, it's a lack of understanding of logic, right? Because the statement, you can believe very easily that some trees have coconuts and some trees don't. You understand that. You're like, yeah, of course, duh, right, yeah. And what we are saying is, in this conversation, the tree is the gender of a person, and the coconut is the sex of that person, right? So therefore, to be logically consistent, you would be able to replace the word tree with gender and then the coconut with sex, and then therefore both of those things are logically sound. Meaning that that's what we're trying to say.
I think where maybe you might be winning me is where you talked about the gender dysphoria thing, and that some people are not willing to have gender affirming surgery or whatever it is. So maybe we can go more on that, because the tree thing I'm not tracking.
But no, you are refusing to track it, Matthew, and that's what I think you're having a problem
the reason why,
with. It's like,
let me explain the reason why I'm not tracking
tree analogy works so well that you are like mad.
The reason why I'm not tracking the tree thing, because the tree is not saying, another tree is not saying, hey, look, well, I want to identify as a coconut tree, so I want to implant coconuts into my in my body or whatever.
You fucking can though. You can. Have you heard?
Winning me more with the.
Have you heard of the 40 fruit tree? You literally can graft different tree branches onto one tree, 100%. And then it can produce numerous fruits.
Yeah.
But a tree is not asking to do that, though. A tree is not saying, I want to do that.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, but that's Matthew. Now you've reached the point of absurdity, right? Now we're arguing from absurdum.
Hold on,
right?
I don't think we're jumping the gun quickly. I think you guys may have me with the whole gender dysphoria thing. I'm like, let's talk about that. Okay. because trees don't do the thing. We realize that.
What is? Do you have a question about gender dysphoria? Like, let's stop abstracting out. We had fun with our tree moment and the trunk. By the way, a trunk is a nose. Exactly. It's a rectangle square situation. And not all noses are trunks, but all trunks are noses. Anyway, that's a different logical question.
It's the same logic. It's the same logic. It's like some noses can be trunks and some noses can't. Like, it's the same thing, Matthew. Even when we use your analogy, you refuse to listen to the fact that we are saying some women can have penises and some women can't. Is the same logical consistency. That's why we are getting so frustrated with you, Matthew. Like, we don't want to have a conversation about gender dysphoria.
Going with this. Let's kind of go.
You're testing my patience, Matthew. You are testing my patience because we've been on the phone with you for 30 minutes and we have been talking about the same stupid sentence this entire call. And we have given you.
You can go on.
Matthew, we have to, though. That's the deal. Like, this is a secular channel. We are talking about logic and reason. Well, I mean, we were skeptics. We try to talk about things about reality. We try to figure out the truth about things.
We had a good point about trees, and I was like, well, trees are not asking these questions. So now I'm like, okay, you can win my mind, but I'm just saying, why, when somebody is asking, hey, I want to be a woman, give me female body parts, that's to me where the inconsistency is. Now you guys are saying, hey, look, not all people that want to do that, and there's this thing called gender dysphoria, and that works with that. And I'm kind of wondering, I know what gender dysphoria is, but I'm wondering where the dysphoria comes from. You guys are saying it comes from society, and now I'm wondering, is that a brain thing?
No.
Okay.
It's a brain thing. Okay. Long story short, thank you so much, Matthew, for this invigorating conversation. We are going to have to wrap it up after this because we usually end up going on a long time with you, but we want to make sure that we get to the rest of our callers for today. So gender dysphoria is a neurological phenomenon. We diagnose it by psychological examination, basically like asking people questions. Gender dysphoria is considered clinical distress as a result of your sex and gender not being in line with each other. And most of the time, that is resolved by taking hormones or social transition or some combination thereof. You know, for young kids, it's a social transition thing. Some people want bottom surgery and some don't. And some trans people don't experience a clinical level of distress. There's a whole conversation to be had about the fact that we pathologize this and that you have to have psychological testing in order to have access to basic medical care that any cisgender person can get. But that's the situation as it is now. That's the understanding that the medical establishment run by cisgender people has decided that trans people have to be diagnosed with clinical distress when their gender and their sex are not in alignment with each other. Some trans people feel that alignment can be resolved.
I don't mean to pause you there, Luxander, but that's exactly what you said. Gender and sex are not aligned with each other.
Yeah, like if you were assigned, like when you were assigned male at birth, but you feel that you are a woman, that's like the gender and sex thing not being in alignment, like because you perceive yourself as wanting to belong to this social category, like, and you can't fit into that social category, and then transition is the thing that helps resolve that sensation.
And now there's a neurological association with that. What is that about? So is the person neurologically? Pardon?
I prefer chocolate over vanilla. I don't know what part of my brain is involved in that, but I do have that strong preference, right? I really hate coconut. I keep trying. I fucking hate coconut, right? We don't know. We can't find it. It's not like a gay gene. We can't find what it is in the brain that makes people feel strongly that they want to be associated with men or women or neither. Like, we don't know where that comes from. We will never find that because it is not possible to find.
That's fine. But what I'm saying is now somebody is desiring to be female or has female parts. Let's say not desiring to be female, but has female parts. Is that also the neurological issue as well?
I mean, where else is it coming from?
Right. Okay. So,
everything about you, everything about you and who you are comes from your brain. Your gender comes from your brain. Like your personal understanding of who you are, what you like, what you want to be called, how you like what group you want to hang out with. All of that shit is in your brain. And we're not going to start dissecting people's brains to find out where the trans part is or anything. We just have to understand and accept at some point that this is a natural human variation that has been in existence for thousands of years. You keep calling yourself a traditionalist, but trans women have been drinking horse piss for thousands of years to feminize their bodies. Like, literally, we've existed for forever. Your traditional... hold on. I'm not done. Matthew. Your quote-unquote traditional understanding of binary gender is based on the fact that Nazis burned all of the books about us. Your knowledge and understanding of traditional binary sex is literally fascistic. It is brainwashing bullshit based on actually the Nazis deciding that trans people don't exist, when we have existed across time for thousands of years, across every fucking culture on this planet. I'm done with this call. Can you please hang up on him right now? I'm done with it.
Absolutely.
Call back later. I'm done with you right now.
Call back later. Bye. Lux with the spice rack. Okay.
It's been more than a month.
Frustrating.
It's been more than a month with this guy. I'm tired of it.
It has. It is. Now, you know what, though? One of the good things that came out of that, though, is now I can start talking about coconut trees and falling out of them. K-High reference for the win.
I just want to remind everybody that you should like the stream because I'm frustrated now. And you should give us money. We'll read your $5 plus super chat.
Yes, $5 super chats for the spiciest of Lux. I
am so tired of him interrupting us too. He was so polite when Ben was on. I was listening to the call like 2 weeks ago. He was so polite and so deferent when fucking Ben was on, but he interrupts us constantly. Like, no, I'm not dealing with it anymore. Okay, he can call back later.
He can call back later. We spent a lot of time with you, Matthew, and fucking take a logic class. Go on YouTube and go do a fucking basic 30-minute YouTube class on what a fucking logical argument is. Like, it's like, come on. Like, I could not have spoon-fed it any better. And you were absolutely right, like around 100% of the time. So we're going to move on to, we have 4 more calls on the line.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, executive producer for The Line and avid candy eater. Hey, if you'd like to support this channel, you can do so now on Patreon or as a channel member with tiers specific to supporting specific shows and hosts. And it also supports our ability to expand programming going forward. You could also leave a super thanks down below, get a little special highlighted comment, and I'll tell you what, you could hit like and you could hit subscribe. Now, here are some video suggestions so we can fudge that algorithm. Go with one of ours. Forget everyone else on YouTube. I'm begging.